It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Hi there. Welcome to a new edition of Rico Brogna, episode number 440. We are going to listen and react to what David Stearns had to say at a Thursday meet and greet with the media down in spring training. It's funny, Hoff and I were going to record this Thursday night, and we had dueling falling asleep offs. He fell asleep, then I fell asleep. I woke up in a cold sweat at like 3 a.m. I rewatched the end of the Knicks game, and I was like, damn it, we never did the Rico. So we apologize, but what we do on episodes like this is we are going to listen to what David Stearns had to say. Every time he gives an answer, we pause it, we respond, we give our opinion. So it works two ways. You get a chance to hear from David Stearns if you didn't listen to his press conference from Thursday. And then even if you did, you get to hear analysis. Now, before we get started, I remind you, Hoff and I are boarding a plane. We're heading down to spring training. We'll be there Saturday and Sunday. We will have a live Rico Brogna from Das Beer Garden in Jupiter, Florida on Saturday. So stop on by if you want to hang out. We may even pop you on the podcast. It's certainly on the table. So join us. We'll be there at around 4:45. We'll broadcast till about 6 o'clock. And then the game, the Mets-Marlins game, which is not televised, not on radio. So it's a real exclusive if you're down there. It's across the street. Roger Dean Stadium is literally across the street from this place, Das Beer Garden. So it'll be a fun time. If you're down in Florida, head out there. If not, you can always listen to us live, whether it's on YouTube or downloading the podcast soon after. So head on down. Now, let's get to the president of the New York Mets, David Stearns. When he announced he was meeting the media, there was a little concern because, as you recall, Brian Cashman met the media earlier that day to give Yankee fans bad news, confirming the injury to Frankie Montas, talking about Giancarlo Stanton. So sometimes when you hear from the GM or the president, you get nervous. We did not get ultimately bad news from David Stearns, but let's hear from David Stearns. Let's start with cut number one.
What were your thoughts when you lost two starting pitchers before March, and how do you feel now about the state of the rotation and the depth there?
You never want to have injuries of any sort, but I think we understand that's part of baseball. It's part of going through 7, 8 month, 9-month season. I would have preferred it didn't happen before our first spring training game, but I do think we're built to withstand this. The rest of our guys are throwing the ball very well. Both Sean and Frankie seem to be progressing, at least for now, along the time frames we anticipated at the front end, which is a good thing. And so now let's keep the rest of our guys healthy. Let's get into the season.
They have been very consistent that they like their pitching depth. So we haven't heard a change of message from David Stearns, nor are we going to hear him say, yeah, we're screwed. Yeah, we have a couple of injuries. We're effed. Here's cut number two from David Stearns.
Mania being a shorter-term thing, I think this weekend will be 2 weeks into his 2-week shutdown.
Yeah.
Is the expectation that he will resume throwing shortly then?
So I think the next step will be early next week, Monday, Tuesday, kind of retest, reimage. And then if all is good, then we progress into the throwing program. So we'll have more information Monday, Tuesday.
So that answer is a really significant answer because when Mania went down, my first reaction was, let's see. I mean, if he can start throwing in a couple of weeks, then this could turn into a minor thing where he only misses a handful of starts. Obviously, the longer he's delayed from throwing, the further into the season he's going to be missed because he's starting from the beginning. He's starting his spring training from the beginning. So early next week, when he has this imaging on the oblique, that is going to be key. If he begins throwing early next week, and then, of course, you assume there are no setbacks. Obviously, there's always a risk of setbacks. But if he can resume throwing next week, that is a huge sign. And that would set him up to come back in the middle of April. And when you think about it, now we're only talking about 3 or 4 starts. And because of all the off days the Mets have early in the season, and presumably rainouts, because I'm sure those will pop up, especially the games at Citi Field. They're not going to have rainouts on the first road trip because they're playing in Houston and they're playing in Miami. But once they come back to Citi Field, and they're playing games in New York in early April, we all know the deal. We all know there's a great possibility games could just get banged. So I think early next week, that is a big moment early in this season for the Mets because the status of Sean Manaea will be revealed. If he still cannot throw, now we're looking at May. Let's be honest. Now I think there's a little bit more concern about filling in for him. But if he can begin throwing, that would certainly be good news, and he could be on his way back to a mid-April return.
Mention them in your answer there, but just what have been your takeaways on that next wave of guys? McGill, Canning, Blackburn as well.
I think all of our starters, including Petey, including Senga, what we saw the other night, certainly Clay Holmes throughout spring, have thrown the ball very well, and that is very encouraging. A number of them came to camp maybe working on something a little bit different, and by and large, those new projects have gone well. That's always fun for us to watch in camp, fun for you guys to watch in camp. You never really know how it plays going into the regular season, but it's going well. And I think we feel pretty good about where our starting staff is at the moment.
It's spring training, so you don't want to get nuts about it, but it is true. We talked about it on the last Rico. Kodai Senga's first start, he looked great. David Peterson's first appearance, he looked great. Clay Holmes has probably been the most impressive in the couple of starts he has now made in spring training. But more importantly, they're healthy. I think with Kodai Senga specifically, it's just about getting through spring training healthy. But yeah, the early returns on some of the starting pitchers, at least the ones that are healthy, have certainly been pretty good.
What are your impressions of Sproat at this point, and how far away could he be?
Yeah, it's tough not to be impressed. He carries himself very well. I think he's very focused. He's still growing and adding to his arsenal, which is exciting for a guy who's as talented as he is and has flown through the minor leagues at the rate that he has. We also believe he still has development left, and we want to see him really have significant success at the AAA level. I think he wants to prove he can do that as well. And once we see that, then we can start talking about when is the right time at the major league level.
And that's what we've been talking about. That, to me, calling up Brandon Sproat shouldn't be about need at the major league level, but more, when is he ready? And the reason I say that is you don't want to rush him, right? You don't want him up here just because it's a need. At that point, I'd rather go veteran, short-term, start-at-a-time option as opposed to rushing somebody. And then once he is ready, once he is dominating at AAA, even if there isn't a need at the major league level, once he's conquered AAA and he's ready, call him up. Obviously, so far watching him in spring training, he threw on Thursday night. He was very unlucky with the run he gave up in the first inning. I thought Jose Siri or Tyrone Town, I'm trying to remember who was playing center. Jose Siri misjudged a fly ball to center field. He took a step back. He thought it was hit harder than it was, and it fell right in front of him. He gets a lot of ground balls. We've seen that. He's popping that fastball at 98 miles an hour. He's been pretty impressive in spring training. But yeah, he's clearly going to AAA, and once he dominates, that's going to be something that's pretty exciting for us as Met fans to see him get called up and make his major league debut.
It is significant success at AAA.
I don't know. We kind of know it when we see it, we want him to get guys out, and I think he will.
Yeah, what is significant success? Is it 3 starts? Is it 8 starts? Is it 12? Who the hell knows? But last year when he got called up to AAA, he didn't pitch well. I mean, it's just it is what it is. So hopefully with a full offseason, being well rested, a chance to make an adjustment, we are going to see him go to AAA and pitch at a very high level.
With him and with Tidwell and a few of these guys, are you pretty happy with the state of your pitching development system right now?
I think we have a lot of people here who, let's say, over the last 4 years, have worked really hard to get our pitching development into a place where we can compete with some of the top pitching development teams in baseball. And I think we're getting to that point. And I think we're beginning to see this wave of prospects get to the upper levels of the minor leagues. And now the next step is we have to successfully transition them to the big leagues. And that's the next test in our overarching developmental philosophies. I think we'll be able to do that. And this year will be a good testing ground for us.
I'll tell you one guy that they have developed. I know you could argue that you don't give him credit for it, but I will, is David Peterson. David Peterson's been here for years. I mean, he was pitching in the pandemic year of 2020. So obviously he's not a child. He's not a kid, but he struggled. He wasn't very good. And we finally saw him take that jump last year to the point where if you told me last year in spring training, David Peterson would have a guaranteed rotation spot in 2025, I would have thought you were nuts. So give Jeremy Hefner, give the pitching lab a lot of credit. Maybe it's just the hip surgery. I don't know. But David Peterson is a guy that they've clearly developed. It's a shame that Christian Scott got hurt last year because he was the first in line of these young arms that came up. And I know he wasn't great, but he showed promise. His overall numbers weren't great, but you watch him, you could see the promise that Christian Scott had. Unfortunately, it's going to be a lost year this year. This year, though, let's see if we get Sproat and Tidwell and further down the line, McLean and Tom.
Going back to Mania, do you have an expectation once he starts the starting program, like how long it could be until you actually have him back?
You're looking at probably a pretty normal spring training. He hasn't gone through spring training, so I think our original time frame was sometime mid to late April. I think that still holds right now.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. If he can start throwing next week, because now you're looking at his spring training beginning on, let's say, March 12th. So usually you're looking at about a month, maybe an extra week. That gets you to the middle part of April. And I also think that you want to take your time. You don't want to rush him. It is still early in the season. I'll tell you one thing, and I know this was suggested in our email. I apologize for not reading it right now, but it's a fair point, specifically about Manaea. He wore down last year. I don't think there's any doubt, especially at the end. Like, he didn't have much in the tank. So in the long run, if the Mets have success this year, it could benefit him from not beginning the season right away and cutting out 3, 4, dare I say 5 starts. Obviously, you don't want to suffer in early April, but it could keep him fresher for the stretch run, assuming there is a stretch run.
We've asked you variations of this before, but just with the way that things have played out now without Madrigal and with Acuna and Beatty still battling for that spot, how comfortable are you with just the way that things were aligned for playing time for like younger guys like that?
Yeah, it's always going to be a consideration for us. And we talk about it a lot. I think it's important. We have to have space on our roster throughout the course of the year for younger players to make an impact, particularly at positions where you have significant talent reaching the upper levels of the minor leagues. We feel like we've got a host of young, talented infielders, and we need to let them play. I've also said it doesn't have to be on opening day, but we need to have a roster construction where we're comfortable that over the course of a season, we're going to allow our younger players to get their shot.
I agree. And that's why I hope Donovan Walton isn't the 26th man on the roster, because he's not fitting of that young player who's a future star who needs to play. It's why I lean today that Brett Beatty gets that 26th man spot on the roster.
Presumably you did fairly extensive research on Soto before you signed him, but what have you learned about him since he got here that you didn't know before this?
He's got a really good sense of humor. He likes to have fun. He's a funny guy. I think, when you watch him across the field, he takes his craft so seriously. And that's also what came across in our meetings with him, is how seriously he takes his craft, how much he thinks about hitting. I think seeing him interact with his teammates on a daily basis, interact with the staff on a daily basis. It's business when it's in the cage, and it's business when it's out there. And then when it's back there, it's fun and it's humor and it's smiling. That's cool to see.
Has he gotten you?
Not yet, but I'm sure he's working on it.
But he may hate being a Met. No, I'm just kidding. One thing I've heard about Juan Soto from his time in Washington, San Diego, the Yankees, and now the Mets is that he works his ass off. And the reason why it's obvious why that's important. But when you have a guy who's signed until he's 40, you want that work ethic to always be there. And it certainly seems like Juan Soto is going to grind and grind and grind. And hopefully that means the majority of that 15-year contract, we are seeing the best of Juan Soto. Here is another clip of David Stearns. It is loading. Please wait. Please be patient. Ladies and gentlemen, the president of the New York Mets, David Stearns. Oh, no. We may have lost David Stearns. He may have just said, screw you guys. I'm not talking to you. I hope to talk to David Stearns when we go down to spring training. I hope we have him on the Rico. I certainly can't guarantee that. I am certainly attempting to do that. He's an interesting guy because one thing that Stearns and Mendoza have come across since they've gotten here, which is very different than past administrations, is that they seem very honest. And I think that's why, as a Met fan, I don't think I'm sitting here just spewing positivity, nor am I spewing negativity. I don't think it's either or. I think I'm just more taking what they say at face value. So when they say, hey, Sean Manaea is going to go for testing on Monday or Tuesday, and if all's well, he's going to start throwing, I think they're just telling us the truth. I don't think it's BS. I think at times with past administrations, when they would tell you things about injuries or the way they felt about players, it felt like they were just basically lying to you. You know, and lying is a very strong word, but it's true. You felt like they weren't being completely honest with you. And one thing about this administration, Carlos Mendoza included, and certainly David Stearns, is it just telling you the truth. And last year, it's funny, when they told us we think this is a playoff team, that bothered a lot of people. A lot of people were like, you're lying to us. This is the same old Mets. But they actually weren't lying to us. They genuinely believed that this roster was good enough to be a playoff team. And I thought the same thing. Now, I didn't think they were going to the National League Championship Series. I'll be the first to tell you that. I didn't think their starting pitching was going to pitch as well as it pitched. But I think sometimes, and the opposite may be happening right now, by the way, we underrate or overrate a team based on the previous season. And the reality is things happen in the season that are worse than what they are or better than what they were. And I thought coming off of 2023, which was a horrible season. I mean, we all admitted it was terrible. We sat here and did Ricos all the time. It was bad. And they obviously ended up giving up. They trade David Robertson, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, the whole thing. But you looked at the roster, at least I did, last year at this time, and I said, they're not that bad. Like, they shouldn't be a 90-loss team. They shouldn't be a sub-500 team. Like, you look at the roster and you say, they're better than that. And I think the mistake a lot of us made was coming into last year, we were so beaten down and so bothered by what happened in 2023. Rightfully so, we're bothered. We thought they were worse than what they were. And I think David Stearns, Carlos Mendoza, and even us, because I thought we were pretty honest about, hey, I think they're better than people think. We looked at the roster and said, they're better than people think. Now, here's the negative to that. The Mets are coming off of the opposite of 2023, a year in which we were wildly successful, defied expectations in terms of the playoff run. Maybe the wins, you thought they could be close to that. And so what's probably happening now with some Met fans is we are overrating what they are based on last year's results. So it's kind of a balance on trying to see the real picture on what a team is. But I think ultimately what I loved about last year's team and what I really like about this year's team is that they can score a lot of runs, that they have a very good lineup. And that's where I had confidence going into last year. And it's where I have confidence going into this season. Obviously, the pitching is the one that brings up the concerns, much like last year. We're certainly having it to varying degrees this season. But the overall offense is ultimately what gives me confidence. Anyhow, David Stearns is back. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to listening to the president of the New York Mets, David Stearns.
You've had two starters go down. You've had a utility guy go down. You talked a bit about it, but now that Quintana's off the board, now that Iglesias is off the board, just any second thoughts on not bringing back guys who were pretty helpful last year for you?
No, we feel really good about our team, and we prepare for injuries. We feel like we have depth, and I'm excited to see what some of our other players, including some of our young players, are going to be able to do with that opportunity.
So I don't think Madrigal should have impacted their thinking on Jose Iglesias, because I don't necessarily think that signing Nick Madrigal, even though it was perceived that way at the time, literally eliminated their interest in Iglesias. I think what eliminated their interest in Iglesias was not being able to trade Jeff McNeil and having Acuna and having Beatty convert to second base and just having a lot of young options. The Quintana thing, that one probably, believe it or not, that one actually bothers me a little bit more, because it's an old adage, but it's true. You never have enough starting pitching. You just don't. So we could sit here all day and talk about Griffin Canning and how the Mets can get the most out of him. And Paul Blackburn was an all-star one time, and Tidwell and Sproat are on their way up. And all that's true. Like, I'm not arguing that. But starting pitching is so finicky. And so if I have a chance to get an arm I'm familiar with, and I'm not doing it at a crazy cost because he only got $4.5 million, and who knows, maybe you get him for less. Because he wanted to be here, you never have enough pitching. And that's an adage that I grew up with, and it's an adage that hasn't changed in this new world. In fact, it's probably become more true today than it was in 1995. So I get the Mets have a lot of pitching options, and I get that David Stearns has a lot of confidence in those guys, but you never have enough. And that price tag was low enough where you very well could have considered just, hey, I'll bring him back, because you never have enough starting pitching.
Just halfway through camp, any developments in particular jump out at you, whether it's performance-based or anything else?
I think when we look at the pitching, which we've already touched on, I'm pretty pleased with how all of our guys came into camp. Look at someone like Paul Blackburn, who recovering from a pretty significant injury over the course of the offseason, but still was able to come into camp actively working on either a slightly different arsenal or improving a pitch. That's pretty encouraging. And so I think each of our starters who have been in camp have something like that and have been able to continue to execute during games.
No one came in hurt. Like what happened in Yankee camp with Giancarlo Stanton. So that's certainly a positive. Let's hear more from David Stearns here on episode 440 of Rico Brogna.
We've seen some relievers around the league make that transition to starter. You guys signed Clay with the intention of doing the same thing. Why do you think that's become more of a trend? And have you been impressed with what Clay has been able to do in terms of that transition to this point?
Yeah, I think Clay came into this with a plan and has followed the plan to a T. And he believed that first he wanted to make this transition, and then he believed he could. And I think he's demonstrating so far that he can. And why is this a trend in the industry? Couple of reasons. I think the first is, as an industry, we're getting better and better on tinkering with arsenals, teaching new pitches. Traditionally, not always, but traditionally relievers have maybe had two really good pitches. And if we as an industry are gaining more confidence in adding pitches, maybe it's a little bit easier to take a reliever and make him a starter if you can add a third or a fourth pitch, particularly one that helps with opposite-handed hitters. The second reason may be a little bit more of how we are using starters as an industry right now. We don't often ask starters to go through a lineup 4 times, let's say. We may not ask them to turn over a lineup 3 times. And talented relievers, if you tweak their arsenal a little bit and you're able to help them build up their endurance and their stamina, probably capable of turning over lineups multiple times. And I think that's what we're seeing throughout the industry.
Damn it. I wish you asked me that question, because that would have been my answer. That it's different. Like, you're not asking these converted starting pitchers, or really any starting pitcher, to go that deep into games. I think the third factor, at least in the case of a guy like Clay Holmes or a guy who's a free agent, is the value on it. You know, a starting pitcher who's decent is getting a lot of money. A reliever who is really good, who's converting the starting pitcher, is making a lot less. Like, the value on Clay Holmes, especially if he turns out to be good, is going to be very, very high. So I think in this case, if you're looking for value, I mean, there was great value in signing a guy like Clay Holmes. But yeah, the first part's true too, obviously, that they just have more knowledge on creating pitches, on tinkering with pitches and things like that. But yeah, we're asking less out of our starting pitchers than ever before. This isn't, 1977. So I think that certainly contributes to it.
How much, when you guys were talking to Clay in free agency, how much is it also the desire of the guy to want to be able to do that?
It's a huge part of it, because it's not easy and it requires a tremendous amount of off-season work, that especially that first off-season, to build up the endurance. I think a lot of people focus on the stuff package and how is it going to play in more balanced lineups and how is it going to play turning over a lineup multiple times. But the endurance part of this and being able to build the stamina requires a real commitment over the off seasons, that you can actually do it then in the regular season.
Yeah, got to have a want. I mean, you're not going to convert someone to a starting pitcher if they don't want to do it. Let's hear more from David Stearns.
You may have partially answered this, but Acuna is a pretty good prospect, and you have stars at third, short, and first at least. Is there playing time for him? Can you get enough playing time for him on this team?
We'll find out. We're not going to put prospects on the team just to sit on the bench. I'm also pretty confident that over the course of the year, through injuries, through performance fluctuations, through matchups, we're going to be able to get our young players sufficient playing time at the major league level. Again, I don't know exactly when that is going to occur. But I think ensuring we continue to have that possibility throughout the course of the year is important.
And I don't know if anyone asks him this. We'll try to if we see David over the weekend. Acuna's a prospect. Acuna's a guy who didn't conquer AAA. Acuna's a guy who I can understand the point of, we got to get him consistent playing time. Does Brett Beatty fit that description anymore? Like, I don't think he's a prospect anymore. I think he's a guy who has already conquered AAA, who's trying to prove he could hit at the major league level. So if you can't get Beatty consistent at-bats, and by the way, I think you can. I think between DH, between sitting McNeil at second base, between various things, Nimmo getting an off day and McNeil playing left, like, I think there are a lot of ways for Brett Beatty to get at-bats, but I wouldn't, at least me personally, I wouldn't treat Beatty the way I would treat Acuna, like a prospect who I can't have sit on the bench.
Marte last year had that bone bruise.
Yeah.
His right knee. The right knee, I guess, is still bothering him. Is there a diagnosis, or do you guys know exactly what you're dealing with there?
It's the same thing. It's this bone bruise. He had told me early in camp, basically, I've played through pain my entire career. I'm used to it. I'll keep doing it. So he's not particularly concerned about this. He performed at a really high level in September and October for us, despite battling a much more severe version of this. We've now had an off season to treat and recover. So I expect he's going to be able to battle through this. And we'll find out more as we get into the next couple of weeks here.
Remember I said earlier on this pod, David Stearns is so honest. It's one thing that's refreshing about this administration. That may be too honest, because if they're looking to trade Starling Marte, the GM/team president basically said, yeah, he's hurt. He's always going to be hurt. He's going to try to play through the pain, which is honest and the truth. But if you are looking to trade him, maybe not the best thing to say publicly, but it's the reality. It's a part of why I think this role for him is so perfect. Being a part-time DH. That's why I believe this is the way to maximize him, whether he's on the Mets or any other team. I would advise you can still get productivity out of this player, but here's how you got to use him. Don't let him play the outfield very often and have him be a part-time player. And that's right now exactly what Starling Marte is and should be on this Met team.
And with Deadneil Nunez, a slow camp coming off the flexor issues last year, what is the plan there for his next 3 weeks leading up to opening day, and also the chances that arm stuff, elbow stuff pops up?
Always a chance. He feels really good right now. We should be getting into lives here over the next week or so, and then from there into game action. But you're right. When you've had recurring elbow issues like he has, it's always going to be in the back of our minds, and it's always a possibility.
What can you guys do to protect him against that?
Look, you try to train the best you can. We're going to monitor usage the best we can. At the end of the day, if you're in a major league bullpen, you got to be available. And so that's a little bit of a balance we'll try to strike.
Boy, that doesn't instill much confidence that they think he's going to stay healthy. But again, it's the honesty thing, right? Deadneil Nunez was electric when he pitched. Can he stay out there? Is he going to be available in back-to-backs? I don't think he will be early in the season. Clearly, based on that answer, they're going to be really careful for him. But right now, one step at a time, let's see him get into games. Let's see him stay healthy. And let's see him make the opening day roster and just not go on the injured list, because Nunez is an X factor in that bullpen. He was so good last year, but clearly based on that answer and based on the reality of last year, it's very tough to rely on him staying healthy. Final one from David Stearns.
What has been the most surprising thing to you in camp so far?
I don't know that I've been surprised in camp. Anything surprise you? I don't.
You're the GM. You're the president of baseball ops. I'm just a guy.
This has been a pretty standard, normal camp. I don't. Maybe that's the surprise. It's been calm. I think we have a group of coaches who know what their jobs are, who are very focused on getting our players ready. I think we have a group of players who know how to get ready for a major league season and are very focused on getting ready for a major league season. That's where everyone's priorities are. Everyone understands what the expectations are for us. So not a lot has surprised me yet.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And I knock on wood when I say this, because we still have almost a full 3 weeks before opening day. It's actually a little under 3 weeks. This has been a mundane spring training, and that's good. It may not be good for interest levels in spring training necessarily, but nothing crazy has happened yet. And let's hope it stays that way. Sometimes the most boring spring training is the best spring training. But I agree, as someone who consumes a lot of the spring training games, listens to Mendy's press conferences, really follows this, nothing has been surprising. I mean, you've had your injuries. I don't think those are surprising, and they've been kind of customary. So let's keep it that way, because right now I'm okay with this roster starting the season. But let's not hear the surprise injury to a major key cog in this lineup, or an arm in the bullpen, or anything like that. It's funny, on Thursday, they played a spring training game with a lot of the regulars, including Brandon Sproat on the mound. And Edwin Diaz got bombed. Like, Edwin Diaz really, really struggled. And there was a part of me thinking, oh, God, don't be hurt. Like, I'm not worried about the results. The results are whatever. It's spring training. We're 3 weeks away from the start of the year. What you don't want to hear is, yeah, I felt uncomfortable. So after the game, when Mendy said, yeah, he was off, no big deal, and Edwin was like, yeah, I was a little nervous, or whatever he said after the game, that made me feel better. Now, we get to April, we get to May, he's struggling. Yeah, we're going to start to panic, but I'm certainly not going to panic off a bad spring training performance. Just stay healthy. That is the key. And I'm certainly excited, because I'm going to see some games up close and personal. We're bringing the Rico Brogna down to spring training. Hoff and I will be at the game Saturday night in Jupiter as the Mets take on the Marlins. We will be doing a live Rico Brogna right before that game that you can consume live on YouTube, or you can download the podcast wherever you download the Rico Brogna. We appreciate it. And if you're down in Florida, you can stop by. We'll be at Das Beer Garden on Saturday at about 4:45 p.m. We'll kick off the podcast. We'll have a good time. We'll talk Met baseball, and then we'll lead you right up until that game that I guess no one can see unless you're there, because it's not on TV and it's not on radio. So maybe we'll tweet a lot to give you updates from that game. And then Sunday afternoon, they play a game in Port St. Lucie, Florida. We'll go there as well. And hopefully Hoff and I will do some interviews with some of the Mets, and we'll play that on a future Rico Brogna. Real quick, you can get half off the new Rico t-shirt by filling out the survey at tinyurl.com/RicoBsurvey. That link, because I said it real fast, I understand, is on the YouTube page. It's also wherever you download our podcast. So it'll be much easier to just click on the link. But Saturday, live podcast from Florida. Sunday, we will give you another live podcast from Florida, recapping our big spring training trip. So if you're down there, say hello. If not, hang out with us digitally through YouTube or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you very much for listening to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.